Welcome to interview number 14 with, this is interview number 15 with Talia, here to talk to you about her experience with a narcissist. Everybody's is different. So we're going to hear what her side of the story is and what she's learned from it. Talia describes herself as a 47-year-old widowed mother of 3 college-age children. She's been a widow for 4 years, and she says she's currently looking for her next husband. So let's get her on here and see what else she got to say. Hey, lady.
Hi, how are you?
I'm just fine. Your intro is funny. So, tell the ladies a little bit more about yourself and, like where what you're doing right now. And say you're a widow, been for 4 years, but, what else is going on? What you're doing, like professionally?
Yes. As you just stated, I am a widow. Been widowed for 4 years. I have 3 young adult children, and right now I am in the human resources, I guess you could say, field. That's
Okay.
been my career for the last 20 plus years,
Nice.
and I live on the East Coast. And I don't know, where should I begin with my story?
Well, what I
Okay.
usually like to have the ladies do is kind of give an overview of, how they grew
Oh, that's
up. And that may or
okay.
may not have something to do with your, direction into narcissism, but, into being attracted to a narcissist. But what it does at least do is lay a foundation to let us know, a little about who you are and how you grew up.
Okay, sure. Okay, well, I come from a traditional 2-parent household, a mother and a father. I grew up with 2 sisters and a brother. I was raised in a very strict household. My mother ruled with an iron fist. Um, she did all the disciplining, and so whenever we stepped out of line, we were, we were spanked, or you could say we received beatings. And it wasn't. I wouldn't say she was abusive, but she meant business, and we were well-behaved children, and so we had a lot of respect for our elders. My father was in the military, and he was. He really didn't discipline us. My mother did that. My father was a loving man, very affectionate, caring man. He had one weakness, though. He was an alcoholic. So my father would, get drunk on the weekend. And despite being an alcoholic, he still was a good provider. He took care of us. But he was never mean to us children. I mean, he was just a very affectionate person. So there was no abuse. I was never abused by my father or my mother. My mother was just, like I said, she was tough, and she did not allow us to, try to run any games on her. And when we stepped out of line, you got your butt beat. So that's pretty much it. I have to also mention, despite my strict upbringing, we were not religious. So I
Oh,
didn't have
okay.
a religious upbringing. That a lot of times people might have a strict upbringing, and maybe they go to church a lot, but that wasn't the case with us. So I did not grow up in the church.
Okay. That's unusual for many African Americans, especially. Uh, Church seems to be a big part of the family dynamic. Okay,
My
so
mother was not religious, neither was my father, but they were strict. So there were some morals that they were trying to impart to us, to their children.
how many of there were you? How many children?
Four of us.
Are you the
3 girls.
oldest?
No, I'm the second oldest. There are 3 girls and a boy, so I'm the
Okay.
second born.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move forward to when Miss Talia started getting interested in boys. What was the dynamics there?
Well, actually, I guess you could say probably around 15, but I didn't do a lot of dating. We were not allowed to date in my home, so I have to mention that. There was no dating. So in high school, I really didn't have a boyfriend. My mother did allow a young man to take me to the prom, but there was no dating. There was no boys, taking you out or coming to the house, anything like that.
Did you at
And
least get to
also,
talk to him on the phone? Nothing?
I could talk to them on the phone, but it was no dating. There
Okay.
was no. She didn't believe in dating. That's how strict she was. So, and also at that time, I was very focused on my schoolwork. I was really into my academics, and that continued until I went to college. Same thing in college. I did have one boyfriend in college. He was an older guy, but that didn't last long. He actually dumped me. So, it hurt, but again, I was more focused on my studies.
Okay.
So I graduated from college, and I had done really well in college and was looking forward to getting my career started. So I moved back home to stay with my parents, and my parents live in the South. So I went back to stay with them so I can try to get my career started and, get a job. And when I, moved back home, I found it difficult to, at that time, find a job in my field. So it was a lot of setbacks. My career just did not take off. And I guess the economy was not doing well where my parents live. So it was really hard that first year after I graduated from college. And this is where my self-esteem took a hit, because a lot of my self-esteem was dependent upon me doing well academically and, starting my own career, having my own career, And so finishing college and struggling, not being able to use my degree, not being able to find the job that I went to school for, I started to doubt myself. I started not to feel good about myself. And this was really like the first time in my life that I had these feelings. I've never had, up until that point, I never had any problems with my self-esteem. So I just felt like everything just hard. So,
So how old were you
so
at this time?
at this time, I was about 21. I was 21 at this time,
Okay.
going on 22. So after a year of not really being able to get my foot in the door, I decided to go to graduate school, and this is where I meet this narc. So I go to graduate school after a year of struggling and not being able to find a job in my field. Decided to go back to graduate school so I could maybe get my life back on track. So I left the South and went to the Northeast to attend graduate school. And while I was there, I met a man who was about 8 years older than myself. But he really swept me off my feet. He was charming. He was very nice to me at first. Took me places, made me feel special. And you got to keep in mind, after that disastrous year of staying with my parents, not being able to get my career, off the ground, I still had my self-doubts. So I think what I was looking for at the time was, I was kind of like saying to myself, okay, well, if things don't work out with my career, then maybe I'll shift my focus to a relationship, which was a big
was that your
mistake.
thinking? Okay.
Yes, which was a big mistake, because again, you remember I had never really, boys, guys. That really wasn't my number one priority. I was pretty much focused on going to school and trying to get my career started. And so anyway, met him, and I started seeing him, and like I said before, he made me feel very special. And he was just, I found him to be attractive. He said all the right things. He told me that He wanted to settle down, that he wanted a family, that he wanted to be a father. You know, these are things that a lot of women want to hear, and this is exactly what I wanted to hear. So,
I forgot to ask you something, or maybe it just came to my mind now. So
okay.
when your parents were raising you and your mother was being strict and your dad was being loving and, they weren't allowing dating, did they at least talk to you about men and relationships and what you should be looking for in a future mate? Did they give you any yays, nays, anything like that?
Okay, the only thing, well, coming up, I heard this from both of my parents, mother and father. My mother would always say, most men are no good. They only want sex. My father would say the same thing. That's as far as it would go. They never sat me down and talked to me about how to date, what to look for. I had no experience in the dating world. Not, about red flags or anything like that. So they never set me down and said, people tend to be nice at first, but that's not the real person. So like I said, it was just like, about they usually just want sex and that they're, usually most men are no good. My mother constantly said that. That was, she just constantly said that.
Okay, then you turn and look at your dad, though, but how does that compute? You know what I mean? Like, are you saying he's no good too? I mean, what are you saying here? That would be confusing to me as a child.
Well, I think she said that because I believe that at some point during the marriage that my father had cheated on her. I mean, she never discussed that with me, but I had overheard her having a conversation with some friends. So that's probably why she was saying that, that she had at some point during her marriage been cheated on by my father.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, so you're with this guy and he's being very nice to you and taking you places and doing things for you at first. I notice how you
Yes,
emphasize that at first.
At first, yeah. And I was gullible, lonely, and desperate. I mean, I have to be honest. I was very gullible. I was in a big city, coming up from the South, and I met a city slicker. He was from the city, used to the big city life. I was not. And he, like I said, he was 8 years older than I was. And so, obviously he had, grown up in, living that big city life.
Mm-hmm.
And to make a long story short, about 6 months after I met him, after this whirlwind romance, I became pregnant with my daughter. And after I became pregnant, I moved in with him. Now, I was still going to school, and so when the semester was nearing the end, I decided to move in with him. I moved in with him. And once I moved in with him, that's when the mask came off. It was, Deb, it was like he was this person that I had never met. He just became so abusive. There was no physical abuse, but he was emotionally and psychologically abusive. So when I moved in with him, he ran the streets. He would go to work, and he wouldn't come straight home. He would come home basically every day, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And so, I guess he must have been doing this before I moved in with him. He had to have been doing this. I didn't know that's what he was doing, but that's what he did. I started seeing that once I had moved in with him.
Right.
So when he would come in, I would say, of course, where have you been? And, he didn't try to pretend anymore. He was just like out. And I would say, but you've been gone so long, you didn't call or anything like that. And he would just say to me, you're not going to keep me out. I just said out. And so this went on. It was pretty much basically every night. This is how the arguments would start, about him running the streets, being out. And it's obvious that he was, running with women, womanizing in the streets. I would find women's phone numbers in his clothes pockets. So every night he had the phone numbers of different women. So so you can imagine I'm pregnant and I'm dealing with this amount of stress because this
Oh,
was
that's
a shock
terrible.
to me. This really hurt, and I felt like I couldn't talk to him. And so I guess he didn't care that hurt me. The fact that you're running the streets, so you didn't want to spend any time with me. And then he seemed to be very cold and very distant. And then whenever he was home, the little time that he was home, at this point, I had not even told my parents that I was pregnant.
Oh, I was going to
So
ask you what they said about it, but okay, well, there's the answer.
I had not even told them that I was pregnant because you got to remember the type of strict upbringing that I had, and I knew what their reaction was going to be. So I'm trying to talk to him like, okay, so what about marriage? You talked a good game about I want to settle down, I want a family, and so now that I had moved in with him and I was pregnant, and every time I brought up marriage, he was just like, well, it's not going to happen. And he would say it so cruelly, it's just not going to happen. And then he'll say, well, no one's ever been married in my family. So he didn't say all this stuff at first, but now I'm hearing this. So that would just make me even more sadder, and I would start crying. And it even got to the point where he would just tell me that he would say what he had to say, like, we're not getting married. And then he would say to me, now go cry, because it had become a pattern of me crying.
Oh, my God, this guy is just doing the most.
Because of what he, because I was just so emotional, I just couldn't handle him, and he knew how to break me down. He knew I was going to cry, and like I said, he would just say, well, just go, now you go ahead on and cry, and then he would just walk away. And so so this went on up until I gave birth to our daughter. Let me go back. I finally had to tell my parents that I was pregnant. So I must have been about 7 months before I even told them that I was pregnant. So that's how long it was a long time. I was very far along before I told them that I was pregnant. And of course, my mother's reaction was, well, you're not married. And I heard, you already know what she said. She said, you're not married. She was like, well, did he ask you to marry you? And then she said, I've never been in this situation. I've never been unmarried and pregnant, and so that's pretty much it. And then,
so basically, she was telling you that she couldn't be any help because she personally had never been in that situation. Is that what she was trying to say?
I think that too, and also I think she was very disappointed, and I think she was also embarrassed.
Oh.
I felt in her voice that she was embarrassed by it, because she was like, well, did he ask you to marry you? Because the thought of having a child out of wedlock, I could hear it in her voice. My mother, according to her, she was a virgin before she got married, and she didn't have any children until she was married. So, I pretty much knew what she expected. And then you got to keep in mind, she had to tell her family. So my mother, I think she was, trying to see how she was going to tell her family that her daughter had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. I kind of think that's what I was sensing talking to her. And she did yell at me. She yelled. But when I told my father, he just said, okay. That's all he said. He said, okay. When I told him that I was pregnant, he said, okay. Just like that.
I know.
So he didn't
really, that is the answer. What else can you say? He's like, be like, oh my God, no, what you gonna do? The baby's coming. It's like, so really, his answer is the most logical one.
Well, he's always been like that, Deb. Even as a child, it was always my mother would, start yelling. But my father, he's always been a calm person, and
Yeah.
so, and I really needed that too because I mean, she had already let me have it, and then having to tell him. And see, the thing was, when I told her, she told me that she was not going to tell my father on her own. She told me that I would have to tell him myself that I was pregnant. Because I was kind of hoping that she would tell him for me.
Oh, no, no, no. She's like, nah, don't put that on me. I'm not doing that. It's funny. We
So,
can make jokes about it now, but I know you were devastated at the time.
I was stressed out. It was a lot of pressure and stress, and up until the point that I gave birth, my mother would call me like 3-4 times a day, and like, is he going to marry you? And I was just like, this is a lot of stress for me. I'm pregnant. I mean, it caused me to have premature labor, but my mother kept calling. I mean, she called me a lot, Deb. She wanted to know if he was going to marry me. And they came up to visit me before I had the baby. I don't know if they wanted to convince me to come back down south, have the baby down there. I'm not really sure, but they did come up to visit me. My whole family came up. They came up to meet him as well. My mother didn't have really too much to say. My father did not say much either, but I noticed how I could tell he was very angry at this narc by the way he looked at him, but he still didn't say anything. So basically he held his anger back. And my mother pretty much showed her anger, even though she didn't say anything. And so it was good to see them, the fact that they came up to show me some support before the baby was born. I chose not to go back with them. I do think they did want me to come back home to have the baby. So I did have the baby in the Northeast, and so I had the baby. And,
were you still living with him at this time?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
And I was in the hospital, Deb, for 5 days because I had a C-section. And so during the 5 days I was in the hospital, he only visited me once. He came there once. He came there one time, and then he came there the day that the baby and I were discharged from the hospital. So that's all. So I don't know why he didn't visit me more. Most people come, at least the father would come every day, but, he only came once. So then the baby and I went home. We went home with him, and once we were there, he was just no help. He became, in my opinion, even nastier, even more abusive. He would not get up.
Was this his first child?
Yes, this was his first child.
Okay.
He would not get up to change the baby. He told me that he was tired of me disturbing his sleep. That's what he told me. So I couldn't get him to help me with the baby. He would not get up. If the baby cried at night, he was not getting up. And if I tried to wake him up, he would. See, we would get into an argument. All I'm asking you to do is to help out. I was tired myself. Plus, I'm recovering from having the C-section. He would not cook for me. I had to cook my own food. And, I could barely stand up straight. So I was in there trying to cook my own food. He was, just not doing anything. He just wanted to sleep and go out and run the streets. So my daughter was about 9 days old. I was feeding her, and it was pretty quiet. And I was like, well, where did he go? I didn't. I said, well, maybe he's cooking or something like that. So after I fed my daughter and she had fallen asleep, I left to find out where he was, and he was in the living room, all laid back, and I could tell he was talking to another woman. There's another woman on the phone. And I went over there, and I was infuriated. And I remember I took the phone, I snatched it from him, and I said, hello, and it was another woman that he was talking to. So while I'm taking care of the baby, he's sitting there all laid back and, talking to another woman. And like I said, you could tell he was talking to another woman just by the way he was sitting there. And,
Their
I guess
posture
he was,
changes. Their body
yes,
posture
yes,
changes. Yeah.
yes. And so at that point, I don't know, it's just something just like a light went off in my head. I went back to my room where the baby was, and I decided that I've had enough of this. And I called up. I had a distant cousin who lived in the area, and I had called her that night and told her that I wanted her to, to pick me and the baby up, that I was going to move back on campus in family housing. I had put in an application for family housing prior to moving in with him because I had a feeling that things were not going to work out. I just had a feeling. So I knew I was pregnant, but I said just in case things did not work out, I had put that application in. So
Good
I
for
had a
you.
place. I had a place to stay. So the next morning, while he was asleep, I gathered up as much of my things that I could, the baby's things, and quietly, got dressed and snuck out the door because I didn't want any trouble. I didn't know if he
Right.
would try to me. But here's the thing: he was asleep, and I took advantage of that. Since he liked to sleep, that's when I left. So when he came to, we were gone, and my cousin met me, picked me and the baby up, and took me back on campus. And that was the end of that story. I left. So my daughter was 10 days old when I left. And I didn't have any money, Deb. I was broke. I didn't have even $10 to my name. I called my parents, and they had to send me some money. And my mother was very happy that I had left, because her main concern was she wanted to make sure that I had gotten my baby away from him. And I told her, yes, I have the baby with me. So I kept my daughter for about 2 months, and it was hard because I still wanted to finish the program, get my master's degree. So when my daughter was about 2.5 months, I went back down south with my baby, and I left my daughter with my parents for several months. She stayed with them for several months, and they took care of her, and that was a big help to me. And I came back to to continue going to school. So she stayed down there for a while.
It's nice to have family to have your back like that. So look at them, in
Yeah,
spite of all
she had
they
my
jumping
back.
up and
I'm
down and
saying,
acting a fool, as soon as something happens, and they're like, "Oh, bring her here."
yeah, they were a big help because Deb, I wasn't getting any child support. I didn't have a job. I was trying to go to school. I didn't have a babysitter. So, I mean, that was the best option at the time.
Yeah.
And once I had gotten back on my feet, I had managed to start going to school at night. Because they had a part-time evening program. So I started going to school at night, and I found myself a job because I knew I had a child to support. And so I went back to get my daughter because, I'm her mother, and I did not mean to have a child and then, put that burden on my parents.
Right.
So I went and got her when she was about 8 months old. So she was gone for a while, and I missed my daughter. Don't get me wrong, I missed my baby.
Of course you
So I
did.
brought her. So I brought her back, and he would come by and pick her up sometimes and take her to visit his mother. So that went on for a little while, up until the point that he was incarcerated. He was incarcerated for selling drugs, because I noticed that I hadn't heard from him in quite a while, and found out that he had been incarcerated. So I didn't, I lost contact after he had been incarcerated because I didn't go visit him. I didn't take our daughter to visit him. We just lost contact. And make a long story short, my daughter did not see him again until she was 16 years old.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So I raised my daughter pretty much by myself. He was not there.
So when he was, when he got out and even while he was locked up, did you like change your cell phone number or anything?
At that time, I don't think I had a cell phone because this was when cell phones were, they were not as popular as they are now. So I moved. I remember moving, but we just lost contact, and I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't know at first that he was incarcerated. It was like, well, I hadn't heard from him and didn't see him. I was done with him, so it wasn't like I was like keeping in contact with him. Even though we had a child together, he would come by before he was incarcerated, and sometimes he would say, well, my beeper it was off and all this stuff, and so sometimes I couldn't even get in contact with him, and he wasn't giving me any money anyway. So the last time I saw him, he told me he had lost his job, so he did not have a job. And so, I didn't know, like I said, that he was incarcerated at first. I just know
Right.
that I had not seen him in a while. It's not like I didn't really make an attempt to try to find him. I just left it alone. I don't know how else to explain it. But yes, he was incarcerated.
My God. Dude. Okay, so you're done with him. Was that your only narc experience?
Yes, that was the only one I've had as far as a relationship outside of the family. I've seen other male members, like uncles and things like that. But yes, that was my only experience in dealing with a narc, and he was. I guess you could say he was like the first serious relationship that I had.
Right.
And so it was really bad because, again, I had no dating experience. I didn't know what I was doing. He had a game, and he ran that game perfectly on me. This is what happens when you come out here and you're naive and, just totally inexperienced for the dating world.
Oh, and those are the kind they look for. The women who
Yes.
are either very young, that's why a lot of these older guys go after the really young girls, or they look for people that are, raised in a very sheltered, kind of naive environment. And they look for women who have a certain mindset about men, which is, I should be submissive. Men are the leaders, men are the king. They look for that kind of mindset. And so any of those three, even though they will, eventually target anybody, but those three are on the hit list, like position number 1, 2, and 3. So you was right up in there, girlfriend. There was no way you was going to escape. It was not going to be him. It was going to be somebody else. Because they would be after
Yes,
you
and
like
when I look back,
sharks.
it's just I can't believe how gullible I was because, again, they don't teach you how to date in high school, the red flags that you should watch out for, and, you might have book smarts, but, I was no match for him. He was slick. So that's pretty
Boy.
much my...
Okay, so now comes the part where you sum up your lessons for the young ladies who are listening to this. So out of everything that you experienced and how you got started and how you met them and everything, what are your say, I don't know, top 3 to 5 warnings, your red flag warnings that you didn't
Yes,
know?
I have 5. I have 5 of them. They all relate to my story. Number 1, be careful dealing with a man or anybody if you meet them and they've been incarcerated. I didn't mention this at first, but when he first met me, he had been incarcerated prior to his meeting me, so he had been in prison before. But I was one of
Oh,
those young women who I did not want to judge, and I felt like everybody deserved a second chance. And he had been in prison for dealing with drugs, so I, gave him a second chance. So that was the first red flag. He had been incarcerated before.
okay.
And the second thing is he had a lot of female friends. When we first started dating, he had a lot of female friends, and I would ask him about that, and he would say, well, I just happen to have a lot of female friends. And being naive and gullible, I'm saying, okay, I didn't want to overreact and trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I didn't want to seem like I was a jealous person. But in hindsight, that did not make any sense. And so, if you meet a man and he has a lot of female friends, you need to run, because I found out that those female friends were people that he had either seen before or people that he was probably interested as far as pursuing them sexually. So I guess you could say potential girlfriends. That's right. What that is when they have a lot of female friends. And the third thing is look out for any type of criticism. I noticed, especially criticism of your physical features. When I first met him, he used to refer to me as olive oil, in reference to Popeye, the cartoon character's girlfriend. So, because he told me he used to date a lot of big women. So at the time, Deb, I was 5'2", weighing like 122 pounds. I was very petite at the time, and so I would constantly hear that, and that also made me have doubts about myself. And now, looking back, there was nothing wrong with being 5'2", weighing 122 pounds. I know in the black community, a lot of our women are full-figured, but I felt like he kind of made me feel inferior by making comments like that.
Right.
And so I just want to say to the young women, just be happy with the way you look, and don't accept any type of criticism of your physical appearance, because that's a slippery slope. Then they'll be telling you need a tummy tuck or a butt lift, or your boobs are not the right size. So you have to cut that off immediately. And then the fourth thing is, when I met him, I was a virgin. This is another thing. I was a virgin when I met him. So I told him no at first, and he kept pressuring me to have sex. So I say to the young women, if you don't do something that you're not ready to do, don't allow a man to pressure you into having sex before you're ready. If you want to wait until marriage, wait until marriage. If you want to wait until, you feel like you're in a serious relationship, then do that. But don't, lose your values or sacrifice your values and morals for a guy, because, in my case, he was not worth it anyway.
Right.
And then the last thing I have to say is another red flag is the family structure. Someone looks like they've had like maybe a challenging childhood. I think that's a red flag. I'm not saying that you can't overcome your past, because some people do rise above that. But in my case, his mother was 15 when she had him, and he explained to me that he had never in his life even met his father. So he didn't even know who his father was. That's like the complete opposite of the type of family that I came from.
Right.
And so in his life, he never even had, any positive male role models in his life. So that might be why he ended up incarcerated. That might be one of the factors. So he had a grandmother and a mother trying to raise him. So those are my red flags.
Those are all excellent points, and several of those are different than anybody else has mentioned so far. So thank you. I think, you that incarceration thing, because that's big. A lot of young girls, especially these kids, the young dudes going to get in a little year or whatever for different kinds of drug offenses, and they come out and they go back, and they come out and they go back. And the young girls, get with them. So that is a good thing to bring to their attention. That might be a problem.
Yeah, you have to examine each situation individually, but between you and me, you know that I'm currently looking for my next husband. I don't want anyone that's been incarcerated. I tried that before, and I don't want to do that again, because if I fail the second time, then it will be, this is the second time that you got burned by someone who had been incarcerated. So, for me, I would not date anyone that's been incarcerated.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's really not on my list of things to do either. I'm like, nah, I think I'm cool. I'll just get somebody because at least if you know you either haven't done anything or you a better crook than the police. So either way, you haven't done no time. So I'm gonna go with that. But Talia, thank you very much for writing in and putting your name in the hat to participate in this programming. I love your story, and I think it's one that a lot of young girls can identify with. And we keep hearing over and over. This is like a theme. These parents aren't teaching their girls anything, and just sending them out here to college and wherever with no knowledge about men or relationships or the games they play. Nothing. Nothing. This is just sinful to me. It's
But no
like
one ever
criminal.
taught them. No one ever taught them how to date. It's like no one's ever told anyone how to properly date. So
Oh,
I think that's the problem. And so I'm definitely teaching my. I have two daughters, so I'm teaching them how to date.
good for
Hope they
you.
listen.
I hope they do too. Well, thank you very much. Thank you again. I'm trying to get this up by the end of this weekend, and then you can let everybody that you're interested in hearing your story hear it.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm glad I was able to share my story.
I am too. Thank you. We'll talk to you
Okay,
soon. See
bye
you on
bye.
the site. Bye bye.
Bye bye.